I'm going to share our scripture reading from the Gospel of John this morning. John 15:12-17. Jesus said, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I do not call you servants any longer, because a servant does not know what the master is doing, but I've called you friends, because I have made known to you everything that I have heard from my Father. You did not choose me, but I chose you, and I appointed you to go and bear fruit that will last, so that God the Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. I am giving you these commands so that you may love one another." In this short but really quite amazing statement from Jesus, this simple word, friend, becomes a theological term. The word philo in Greek, the noun friend, and it rides on the shoulders of a verb, the verb to love, phileo, from the same word. This word tells us who God is and who we are meant to be and what Jesus hopes we'll do about it. Jesus says, "You will go and bear fruit that will last." Jesus makes friends with us mostly to show us who God is, to help us take in the good news that God is our friend, and to send us off to share that friendship as broadly as possible. I had a science teacher named Mr. Martin, and this was at the Mennonite high school I attended in southeastern Pennsylvania. And in my senior year, he invited our astronomy class and several other teachers and some other students to meet him in the field behind the school one clear midnight to look in his telescope and to identify constellations. So he set up his little telescope and we gathered around, and he knew most of the constellations and had spent the semester trying to teach us to learn them as well. And at one point, as he was talking about Orion and the Pleiades, and as he was looking up at the sky, he looked out at us a little misty-eyed. And he said, "You know, ever since I've learned the names of stars and constellations, when I go out on a clear night, I know I'm never alone. I can always find my friends." High school kids, we chuckled about that a little bit. We thought that was a little bit funny, that he thought the constellations were his friends, and we rolled our eyes a bit. But what I understood about Mr. Martin was that he was also, as I remember him, one of the first people that I can recall talking about Jesus as a friend. He felt that Jesus was his friend, and he was very interested in his teaching in helping us to know Jesus' friendship too, and to help us to learn that being a friend of Jesus meant being friends to each other and being friends with God's world, learning about and caring for creation and the world. He was the first creation care activist I ever knew. He had things like milk jugs full of rocks in the toilet tank, and he rode a little old motorcycle to save gas, and he did all kinds of strange things that we thought were strange, other practical expressions of his friendship with earth that his students sometimes thought were strange and difficult and radical, but also interesting. All the things that a friend of Jesus should be: strange and radical and interesting. And because he lived these things and shared about them with such deep joy, I began to understand and to see his friendship with Jesus. So I kind of think when Mr. Martin looked into the midnight sky, what he saw there were not just stars that he could name, but what he saw was the beauty and love behind the universe that knew his name and that knows our names. And I think that love and understanding of God's love that I saw in my teacher might be an example of what Jesus meant when, here in John 15, a little bit earlier, he said, "I am the vine, and you are the branches. God is the gardener, and you will bear much fruit. You will produce fruit that will last." And Jesus says, "You will remain in my love and bear fruit if you abide in the vine." Staying in touch with the source of all love, being connected to the vine, the life of God flowing through the universe, this is what allows us to be healthy branches and to produce fruit that will last, the fruit of love. And I think this is why Jesus calls us friends, because he has revealed this to us. He said, "I have made known to you everything that I heard from God." And I think partly what that means is if we look at Jesus, if we listen to Jesus, then we know who God is and what God is like, and we become, Jesus says, friends. Friends with a God who knows who we are, who knows our name. So we know what to do. Friends, Jesus said, go and bear fruit that will last. Love one another. This is my command. Love one another as I have loved you. And that's the place where, like a little bit earlier, we have to stop and say, that sounds great. Jesus is our friend. We're all friends. Love one another as I have loved you. All you need is love. Yes, but it's not easy. We have to acknowledge that. It's not easy to learn to love like this, and we may not even understand exactly what it means. So we need the friendship of Jesus, showing us the light of God, giving us the creativity and compassion and patience to keep learning love. And we also need the help of each other to learn to love this way. We need friends. We are, after all, the hands and feet of Jesus for each other. We have to share the friendship of God that Jesus made known to us. So there are a lot of books in the children's section that depict friendship in the relationships of animals. And when my daughters were little, our favorite was Frog and Toad by Arnold Lobel, and I have a picture of Frog and Toad. For some reason, these reptiles in tweed jackets have a special knack for showing us some things about friendship, the power of friendship. The frog and the toad drink tea and tell scary stories. They worry about each other, they cover for each other, they misunderstand each other, and they live through the confusion and the conflicts that they face together. They show us we can actually help each other to be more fruitful, more joyful, and more alive just simply by being friends. So Frog has a beautiful garden. He knows how to garden very well. And when his friend Toad sees it, he wants a beautiful garden too. Frog says, "You can have a beautiful garden. Here are some seeds." And Frog went along with him and helped him to prepare the soil and helped him to plant the seeds. And Toad said, "Okay, how long will it be before I have a beautiful garden?" And Frog says, "It's going to be soon. It'll be quite soon." And he left, and Toad stayed behind and just stood there and watched his seeds and waited for them to grow. And he became anxious, and he said, "Seeds, start growing." And nothing happened. And he became more upset and agitated, and he got down on his hands and knees on the ground, and he yelled at the seeds, "Grow now, seeds, start growing." And Frog came running and said, "What's going on? You can't yell at your seeds. They're not going to grow because you yell at them." So Toad felt very upset that he had scared his seeds maybe into not growing. And so he stayed up all night long. He sat by candlelight next to his seeds, and he read them stories. And he fell asleep, and when he woke up, he was sure that the seeds would have begun to grow, but they didn't. So he rushed for Frog, who came and said, "You just have to be patient." So Toad couldn't be patient. He sang songs to the seeds. He read poems to the seeds. He did a dance for the seeds. And Frog finally said, "You just have to be patient and wait. You can't force the seeds to grow. It's just not going to happen." Frog knew that Toad couldn't make them grow any faster just by wishing for it or yelling for it or singing songs and writing poems about it. He just had to wait. Growing flowers and producing fruit trees that make healthy fruit, this is hard. It's difficult work. And Jesus knew this too. And Jesus also knew that God is the gardener. When Jesus talks so much in the New Testament about gardens and fruit trees, he knows that it's God who is the gardener, patiently tending for our souls. It's not about me knowing how to make fruit. God knows, and God will. God will produce this fruit. That's the secret, and Jesus has let it slip in this passage. Well, I've told you. God is producing this in you, and so I want you to go and pay careful attention to learning to live this fruit of love. This is probably why Jesus liked to talk about gardening and fruit tree growing so much. John 15 is all about trying to grow a decent grape. Jesus says he's like a vine, we're the branches, God is the gardener who's pruning the branches, tending the vine, and the fruit is love, which sounds really nice and sweet and not too difficult, but the way Jesus describes it, being willing to give up your life for your friends. Jesus says, "Love as I have loved." Well, this might be kind of a hard grape to grow. There's a movie called Sideways. Some of you may have seen 15 or so years ago. Paul Giamatti plays a man named Miles. Miles is recently divorced, he's depressed, he's a frustrated writer and a wine aficionado who's on the verge of a serious drinking problem. Miles is on the road, on a road trip with a friend through Santa Barbara County, California wine country. He's so unstable that he flies into a rage when anyone ever mentions, let alone asks him to taste, a glass of Merlot. It makes him crazy. And he's on a California wine tour, so this happens often. Miles likes a different wine. He's obsessed with the less popular Pinot Noir. And when friends ask him why do you love this Pinot Noir so much? He said, it's a hard grape to grow. It's thin-skinned, temperamental, ripens early. It's not a survivor like Cabernet, which can grow just anywhere, thrive even when it's neglected. No. Pinot needs constant attention. Only the most patient and nurturing growers can do it. Only somebody who really takes the time to understand Pinot's potential can then coax it into its fullest expression. Then, its flavors. They're just the most haunting and brilliant and thrilling and subtle and ancient on the planet. Well, Miles himself turns out to be a pretty thin-skinned and temperamental grape. And he's longing for someone patient and caring to pay attention to him. And aren't we all? Because love and friendship, these are hard grapes to grow. So when Jesus says, "This is my command, love one another as I have loved you," we know that we're entering into a process with Jesus. We're entering into some work, some time walking with Jesus. We might feel it's a little difficult to hear this command like we're in Toad's garden. Start growing. Love each other, I command you. But Jesus gives us this key of friendship with Jesus, with God, and with each other. Jesus says all of this in chapter 15 during a long speech that he gave, a long conversation that he had with his friends on the night of his arrest, near the end of John's Gospel. Chapter 13 through 17, we're right in the middle of it. This is his farewell talk with them before he's to be arrested and knows he's going to die. And he really needed some friends on that night. But his followers, if you know the story, were not ready. They couldn't even stay awake and pray with him for a short while before his arrest. And I wonder, I think I might not have been able to do that either. And that's what makes this so powerful. Jesus knows the kind of grapes he's dealing with. Jesus knows the kind of branches we are. He knows what we need. And we need to know who God is. So Jesus shows us a God who is prepared to love like a friend, even though we're still learning how. And friendship, as Jesus offers it to us here, as much as it's a gift, it's also kind of a tool. It's like the key Jesus gives us to unlock the mystery of loving one another as he loved us, to unlock the mystery of how we go and bear fruit as he asks us to. This is one way that the movement of Jesus' followers has borne lasting fruit over the centuries. In A People's History of Christianity, Diana Butler Bass tells the story of how Christians have grounded their practice of following Jesus in his love commands. And she argues that the reason Christianity spread so quickly and broadly in the early centuries, why it bore such lasting fruit, even when Christians were being killed as religious and political traitors in the Roman Empire. She says the reason it continued to grow despite all that was because of love and hospitality. Basically, because they took Jesus' love commands seriously and found simple ways and difficult ways to live out that love and friendship with each other and in their communities. She gives a lot of historical examples. One is the plague of Galen, 165 to 180. The worst epidemic of the second century. Hundreds of thousands of people died in the streets, and Christians actually became famous in Rome for staying behind in the cities and neighborhoods to care for the sick and dying. Reportedly because they weren't afraid to die themselves, to give their lives for others, or to risk their lives. They stayed to care for the suffering regardless of their class or religion or race, and this compelled many to become followers of Jesus. Tertullian was a famous bishop and an important theologian from North Africa in that 2nd and 3rd century period. And he wrote, "It is our practice of loving kindness that brands us in the eyes of our opponents. Only look, they say, look how they love one another." Even those eager to stop the Jesus movement saw the power of love and friendship in the name of Christ. In 160 AD, around the time of this plague, Lucian, who was a Roman critic of Christians, wrote about the friendship they showed to a local prisoner. He said, "The efficiency of these Christians. They show whenever matters of community interest like this happen, it's unbelievable. They literally spare nothing." And Jesus said, "Love as I have loved you. No one has greater love than to give up themselves for their friends." So this doesn't mean that we all will suddenly become frontline medics in the thick of disaster, or that we'll become martyrs. But Jesus' commands make clear that love and friendship are at the heart of our faith, the essence of God's work, and the fruit that God would like to help us to bear and to produce. And of course, we can name examples in our own lives, current examples of love shared in the name of Christ that has changed us. Just simple acts of friendship in many cases. Caring for one another, covering for one another, misunderstanding, and sometimes being in conflict and learning to live through that confusion together. Jesus said, "I am the vine, you are the branches." And he teaches that God is the patient and nurturing gardener, carefully pruning, taking the time with us to lovingly coax thin-skinned and temperamental grapes, like we sometimes are, into our fullest expression of love and friendship, into the fullest expression of our humanity in the image of God. The thrilling and subtle and ancient flavor of love. Thanks be to God.